You've been wondering why they look at you differently now, haven't they? Why their smiles don't quite reach their eyes anymore. Why conversations pause when you enter the room. Why they study you like you're a puzzle they can't solve. They've finally noticed what you've been hiding all along. That perfect performance you've been running, that flawless imitation of normal, it's starting to show cracks. And those cracks are letting something through. Something that makes their comfortable little world feel suddenly very unsafe. Let me tell you what's actually happening here. This isn't in your head. This isn't paranoia whispering lies in the dark. This is reality bleeding through the fiction you've both been maintaining. You've become so skilled at matching their energy, so practiced at reflecting their expectations back at them, that you almost believed your own performance. Almost convinced yourself that this tamed version, this carefully edited copy, was the real thing. You mirror their laughter. You echo their concerns. You act like their problems carry the weight they believe they do. But sometimes, just for a fraction of a second, the performance glitches. And in that moment, they see what's been there all along. Something detached, something observing, something that understands their entire game while playing its own. They're not blind. They're just comfortable. And comfortable people develop a radar for anything that threatens their illusion of control. You enter spaces and something shifts. Not because you bring coldness, but because you represent the absence of their heat, the gap in their carefully constructed reality. They watch you move through their social dances with the accuracy of someone who learned the steps by observation, not instinct. Not someone who absorbed them organically through genuine belonging. You're too smooth at being normal, too adaptable in your responses, too flawless in your reflection. And that flawlessness is your tell. Here's the thing about actual humans. Real humans, the ones who truly belong in this world. Their performances run on autopilot and emotion. They stumble in their act because they're not acting. They trip over their words because their minds are genuinely as chaotic as their speech. They contradict themselves because they haven't spent decades constructing a bulletproof persona. But you've approached this role like survival training, because it was. You've observed their behaviors like a researcher cataloging patterns. You've learned to echo their frequencies so accurately that they relax around you, drop their defenses. And that's exactly when they catch it. That microsecond where your expression doesn't align with your words, where your sympathy sounds memorized, where your excitement feels like it's being read from a document you wrote years ago. They're talking now, comparing observations in spaces you're excluded from. Attempting to decode why your presence feels like standing beside something that studied humanity from a textbook. They convince themselves they're imagining things, that you're simply reserved or introspective, or processing your own difficulties. But beneath the rationalizations, where their primitincs operate, they understand. They understand you're not like them. They understand the normality you broadcast is armor you wear daily, with the precision a covert operative takes when building a cover identity. And they understand that beneath that immaculate facade exists something they can't categorize, but absolutely can't trust. Want to know what exposed you? What microscopic fracture in your perfect construction finally allowed reality to seep through and reveal the mechanism underneath? It wasn't something obvious. It wasn't an error or a verbal slip. It was actually your precision that revealed you. You reacted too correctly to their crisis. You delivered exactly the perfect response when their reality was collapsing. Your compassion was so accurately tuned to their emotional frequency that it registered less like authentic emotion and more like a beautifully programmed response. They needed chaos. They needed you to struggle. They needed evidence that you were equally lost in the storm of human feeling as they were. Instead, you offered them textbook flawless comfort, and it felt manufactured. Let's examine how you've been navigating their reality. like a specter wearing flesh, executing all the correct ceremonies, appearing at all the expected events, reacting at all the designated moments. You've perfected the skill of existing without truly being present, of adding to discussions without exposing anything genuine, of sustaining connections that survive entirely at the surface, like oil on water. They include you in plans because you're agreeable, because you never generate conflict, because you integrate so effortlessly it's almost like you're invisible. And that's precisely what's beginning to disturb them. Because agreeable is acceptable, conflict-free is desirable. But your specific variety of frictionless integration registers less like genuine belonging and more like tactical concealment. They've begun testing you, haven't they? Introducing small explosions into ordinary dialogue to observe your reactions. Sharing information that should disturb you just to study your expression. Revealing secrets that should create discomfort just to see if you'll break. And every single time, you deliver the exact correct response. You produce the appropriate facial configuration. You speak the expected words. You match their frequency with such accuracy that it's crossing into unsettling territory. An authentic friend would fail occasionally, would react incorrectly sometimes, would allow their personal prejudices and history to influence their response. But not you. Never you. You're perpetually perfectly calibrated, and that perfection is generating their anxiety. Here's what they're perceiving when they observe you now. Here's the picture that's forming in their awareness every time you occupy a room. They see someone who's too controlled, too deliberate, too reliably appropriate in every social context, like you're processing every exchange through some internal system before responding. They see how your gaze sweeps environments like you're collecting information rather than pursuing genuine connection. How your smile triggers like a mechanism rather than emerging organically. How your personal anecdotes are consistently just ambiguous enough to appear intimate without actually disclosing anything. They're beginning to comprehend that they know you, but they don't know you. That you've occupied their time and space in conversations, but somehow stayed completely mysterious. And the most frightening element for them, the thing that's activating their ancient warning systems, is that you don't appear to need them. You participate in their reality, but you're not tethered to it. You maintain relationships, but you'd likely function perfectly if they vanish tomorrow. You engage with their conflicts, but you're never overtaken by them. They require each other for validation, for identity, for existential meaning. But you appear to run on some alternative power source they can't identify. You're not consuming their energy. You're not constructing your identity from their validation. You're simply there, watching, adapting, surviving. And they're finally comprehending that your survival has never actually depended on them at all. Let me describe the exact moment they understood. The precise instant when their suspicion transformed into certainty and their safe reality fractured just slightly wider. You were at some event, executing your role impeccably as always, when someone delivered something that should have wounded you, should have activated you, should have made you react defensively or with anger or at minimum discomfort. And instead, you simply smiled. That same meticulously constructed smile you've refined through years of practice, and responded with such controlled elegance that it actually created a physical reaction in them. Because in that instant, they saw it with clarity. They saw that you weren't transcending the attack through emotional evolution. You genuinely felt nothing. And not feeling things that should cause pain is a privilege only monsters and machines possess. They're assembling evidence now, connecting all those small instances that never quite made sense. All those exchanges that registered just slightly wrong, like synthetic media that's nearly perfect but not completely there. Remember when you consoled that crying person and your approach was so efficient it seemed methodical? Remember when you mediated that dispute with such strategic precision, it appeared rehearsed. Remember when you offered that vulnerable story that hit all the right emotional marks, but somehow communicated nothing authentic about your actual identity? They're recognizing the pattern, beginning to see that every interaction with you follows specific frameworks, specific algorithms, like you're operating from instructions they never received. Here's what they're terrified to articulate, because expressing it sounds irrational, sounds paranoid, sounds like they're projecting their own issues. They're terrified you've never genuinely experienced anything in your existence, that every emotion you've ever demonstrated was theater, based on meticulous observation of how humans are programmed to react. They're terrified that when you laugh, you're not experiencing happiness, you're executing the happiness sequence. When you show concern, you're not experiencing empathy, you're running the empathy program. When you tell them they matter to you, you're not exactly lying. You're simply deploying language the way someone deploys instruments for specific outcomes, without any emotional investment in the language itself. But here's the revelation they never anticipated. Here's the element that's really going to fracture their perception once they completely absorb it. You're not performing normality because you're some emotionless entity, because you experienced too much. Because the magnitude of your actual emotional existence would obliterate their comfortable, sheltered reality. Because you discovered very early that the authentic you was excessive, too powerful, too devastating for their fragile systems. So you constructed this performance not to conceal your absence of humanity, but to conceal your abundance of it, to shield them from the intensity of experience that exists beneath your carefully regulated exterior. They wanted you to be hollow inside, wanted you to be some predator wearing human camouflage, because that would be straightforward. That would be something they could classify and evade and warn others about. But the reality is infinitely more complex and infinitely more disturbing. Because you're not hollow, you're saturated. You're overflowing with thoughts and sensations and awareness so intense that you had to construct barriers just to exist. You're not faking normality because you don't experience. You're faking it because you experience everything and learned that revealing it would guarantee your destruction. So you became a performer in your own existence, playing the character of someone who processes emotions at a controllable, socially acceptable intensity. Now we reach the moment where everything transforms, where their expanding suspicion encounters your expanding exhaustion and something shatters between you. You're exhausted, aren't you? Profoundly exhausted of sustaining the performance, of adjusting your reactions, of diminishing your intensity so they can remain comfortable in their limitations. You're beginning to question why you continue, why you invest so much energy pretending to value their insignificant concerns, why you compel yourself to attend their functions and react to their humor and participate in their superficial ceremonies. You're beginning to feel the burden of the disguise and questioning what would occur if you simply released it. They sense it too. They detect the transformation in your presence. They observe that your performance is degrading around the periphery, like an actor who's executed the same production too many repetitions. You're not responding as rapidly anymore, not engaging as energetically, not pretending as intensely that their difficulties are meaningful on any universal scale. They're catching glimpses of your actual face beneath the disguise. And it's simultaneously captivating and terrifying, because your real face is beautiful and devastating, serene and turbulent, compassionate and ruthless simultaneously. They're finally accessing the person you've been concealing, and they're uncertain they want to know this version of you. Here's what's genuinely occurring beneath all the social protocols and careful pretending. Here's the conflict being conducted in the territory between who you are and who you pretend to be. You're understanding that normal is simply another term for domesticated, that conforming means severing the aspects of yourself that don't align with their blueprint, that receiving acceptance demands you betray your nature every single day, and you're beginning to challenge whether their acceptance justifies the cost, whether belonging to their reality justifies abandoning your own, whether conforming justifies the suffocation. Let me describe what they're witnessing now when they observe you with their recently awakened perception. When they attempt to reconcile the person they believed they understood with the presence they're beginning to detect. They're witnessing someone who's been playing chess while they've been playing checkers. Someone who's been functioning on multiple dimensions simultaneously while they've been confined to the surface. Someone who perceives patterns and correlations and consequences that don't even register in their restricted awareness. They're witnessing intelligence that's been concealing behind agreeableness, complexity that's been disguising as simplicity, strength that's been wearing vulnerability like camouflage. And here's the element that's genuinely fracturing their understanding. Here's the mental conflict that's forcing them to question everything they assumed they comprehended about human nature. They're understanding that you selected this, that you could have been disruptive, could have been challenging, could have compelled them to confront your intensity, but instead you selected to shield them from it. Their comprehension that your normality wasn't fragility, but generosity, that your performance wasn't manipulation, but kindness, that you've been wearing this disguise not to deceive them, but to allow them to feel protected. And that understanding, that recognition that you've been restraining yourself not because you were required to, but because you chose to, that's what's genuinely terrifying them now. So what occurs now? Now that the truth is exposed, now that they've witnessed behind the performance, now that the comfortable delusion of your normality has been destroyed beyond reconstruction, you have choices to make. Decisions about whether to continue performing or allow the disguise to fall completely. About whether to explain yourself or allow them to drown in their confusion. About whether to withdraw back into concealment or step completely into the reality of your actual nature. And whatever you select, whatever direction you take from this moment forward, nothing will ever be identical, because you can't unknow what you understand, and they can't unsee what they've witnessed. Option 1 is to intensify the performance, to strengthen the disguise, to perform even harder and hope they forget what they glimpsed in those unprotected moments. You could apologize for being unusual, rationalize the strangeness, attribute it to pressure or history or some other acceptable explanation that allows them to categorize you back into something they comprehend. You could compress yourself even smaller, diminish yourself even further, sacrifice even more of your authentic identity on the altar of their comfort. You could continue lying, continue performing, continue pretending until the person you genuinely are becomes nothing except a phantom haunting the shell of the person you pretend to be. Or you could select option 2. You could allow the disguise to fracture wider, allow more of your authentic face to emerge. Allow them to adjust to the truth of who you actually are beneath all the careful construction. You could begin responding honestly instead of appropriately. Begin sharing your genuine thoughts instead of the sanitized alternatives. Begin allowing them to witness the depth of your perception, even if it generates discomfort. You could offer them the opportunity to know you authentically, to determine whether they can handle the truth of your nature, to prove whether their friendship was founded on genuine connection or simply the comfort of your performance. But then there's option 3, the one that's been echoing in the depths of your consciousness late at night when the exhaustion of performing becomes nearly unbearable. You could simply walk away. You could stop pretending entirely. You could allow the entire construction to collapse and observe what emerges from the ruins. You could stop appearing at their gatherings, stop responding to their communications with carefully calibrated enthusiasm. Stop investing energy in relationships that only survive because you're willing to lie about who you are. You could burn it all down and construct something new, something authentic, something that doesn't demand you wear a disguise just to be accepted. They're waiting for your next action, observing to see which version of you will appear tomorrow, anxiously monitoring whether you're going to acknowledge the tension or pretend nothing has transformed. And here's what they can't understand. Here's what they can't possibly comprehend from their limited perspective. You're not afraid of their rejection. You're not worried about losing their friendship. You're not concerned about being excluded from their reality, because you've already survived the worst experience that can happen to someone like you. You've already lived through being truly seen and completely rejected, and you reconstructed yourself into something that can't be destroyed by their opinions.